Erik Prince, the former Navy SEAL and founder of Blackwater, the infamous military contractor that took on lots and lots of work during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, was recently on the Sean Ryan Show, and he talked about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, the US dollar, and geopolitics. It was a fascinating conversation because this is an individual who has immense amounts of data and information at his fingertips, and he's also highly connected with various global leaders around the world. In the conversation, Prince points out that he believes that sanctions are actually weakening the US dollar on a global stage. The US dollar is the global reserve currency, but he points out that those financial sanctions against Russia and other countries are actually incentivizing various countries that are large and may not be as friendly with the United States to come together and start to do trade in a bilateral way without using the dollar as that common unit of account. Now, of course, Erik Prince is sharing his own personal opinions, but it is fascinating to hear him talk about what he calls society-level change with the United States if they lose US dollar dominance, having to pay for many of their prior errors. Here's exactly what Erik had to say about financial sanctions and the potential diminishing power that the US dollar may carry on that global stage.
So for the last 70 years, we've enjoyed the dollar being the world's reserve currency, right? And what that allows Washington to do is spend trillions of dollars extra. Part of the aura or the facade of the dollar being the world's reserve currency is that there's this American military hegemony, right? We have this amazing military that can smack any target, anytime, anywhere. And when you have the debacle that was Afghanistan, a failure in Iraq, a failure of deterrence in Ukraine, when that failure of deterrence now leads to conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and now everybody goes hog wild on sanctioning everything Russia, right? Russia's still the largest energy producer in the world. They're going to sell their stuff somewhere, and somebody's going to buy it, right? They want to be paid in rubles.
Yeah.
And they'll trade with India, who can pay with rupees. And the Chinese will pay with renminbi, right? So they call it the 3 Rs. And so they create a trading bloc to further reduce the hegemony that the dollar has in trade. When the dollar loses that status, then our idiots in Washington can't spend an extra $1 trillion a year. And when America has to finally live within its means and start to pay that debt back, holy shit, that is society transforming level change.
Now, when you hear Erik Prince talk about these things, the first question I have, well, what exactly would this future look like if the financial sanctions actually do weaken the US dollar? And later in the conversation with Sean Ryan, Prince lays out that Weimar Germany, which is decades old story, could be a cautionary tale that the United States should pay attention to. Here's Prince describing why Germany is so important to understand as we move forward in this current monetary policy regime.
You took a country like Germany that lost World War I, and they printed and printed and printed money. And the mighty history of the German-Prussian society collapsed, and all that wealth was destroyed because it went from, 1 German mark to buy a loaf of bread, up to 1 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread. Just hyperinflation that ran away. And the German society elected a psychopath like Adolf Hitler. And that's the kind of insanity we have to prevent.
Now, of course, Erik Prince, myself, and anyone else who's watching this has no clue what's going to happen in the future. But to understand the intricacies and the complexities that revolve on the geopolitical stage, when you add in central banks, monetary policy, and various other issues, it all becomes clear that we could be headed towards some pretty bumpy times. Now, one of the weird things in the Bitcoin community is that the more you understand the legacy system, the more you realize that we need a new system. There's lots of issues, and eventually those issues will come to a head. Now, I don't like the doomsday stuff. I actually am a deep, deep optimist. I believe that we live in the greatest time in human history. It's the most prosperous and safest time. And I hope that we have a better future than our past. But I also understand that you have to be rational. You have to take an honest look. Where are we headed? And what can we do to mitigate the risks? As we continue to see the geopolitical stage unfold, Listening to someone like Erik Prince, even though he's controversial, even though many people disagree with some of his actions or previous things he said, it's important. As I mentioned, he's got immense amounts of information at his fingertips, and he's very well connected on the global stage with leaders, people of power, and influence. Watching this interview was eye-opening for me. And to hear him talk about financial sanctions weakening the US dollar dominance and potentially leading or contributing to hyperinflation in the US, it's not something that's guaranteed. It's something that I hope never happens, but it's something that we should understand, we should pay attention to, and we should encourage our leaders to do everything they possibly can to mitigate that risk.